Hello, Mrs. Rupp, and welcome at Rock FM, Romania.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So, Mrs. Rupp, you began your position of Deputy Chief of Mission in Romania in August. What was your first impression about Romania?
You know, coming to Romania in August was a great opportunity for me because, in fact, my first assignment with the State Department was in Chișinău, in Republic of Moldova,
nice
almost 20 years ago. Okay. And so coming back here and seeing how the city has changed, how Romania has changed, has been really interesting. You know, there's a sense of energy and of possibility, and there's greater investment. So it's been a really nice experience.
It's good to hear that. What's your favorite place you've visited here?
Well, one of them is just outside the window here in Harrowstroke Park.
Yeah.
It's lovely to be in a city that has so much green space, and so it's nice to have a chance to get into a little bit of nature right in the middle of everything else that's going on. And I'm looking forward to traveling some more around the country as well. I visited Iași and Sibiu and Galați so far, but I know that's a small part of what I need to see. So.
Okay. So, Mrs. Abby,
Abby, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You had a lecture this year, Rock and Roll Diplomacy. It was entitled How American Music Influenced the Rolling Stones and How the Stones Changed America. I'm very interested to hear in what way they changed America.
Well, I would put their influences in two categories. One is maybe the more obvious one, which is how their music influenced generations of American musicians. So everyone from at the very beginning, country crossover artists like the Flying Burrito Brothers, which is a fascinating story, to the Grateful Dead, to more obvious comparisons like Aerosmith or ZZ Top, and then going up to today to classic blues rock bands such as the Black Keys or the White Stripes. They all, you can draw a direct line, I think, from the Stones' music to them. And then I think the other influence that is maybe not as well known is how they influenced the way that bands tour. The Rolling Stones had a number of firsts as a touring band in the U.S., starting with their perhaps ill-fated 1969 tour, including setting ticket prices based on demand, which we may or may not think was a good idea. It raised the ticket prices a lot. To planning a stage set and traveling with that set, to having audio monitors when they were performing, which was actually developed by the road technician of the Grateful Dead, interestingly enough.
Fascinating, yeah.
And then also, I think one of the big influences on the touring part was that Mick Jagger in particular was aware that a concert was not just performing the music, it was performing and acting, and he created a persona, which we can see, again, all the way through American music, including some, kind of divergent types of bands, like Kiss or Marilyn Manson, where they created this persona. That also came from the Rolling Stones.
Could I ask, in what way did they influence you?
Well, I think one of the most direct influences for me was that it spurred me to learn more about what influenced them. The American music that's out the foundation of their music. So blues, gospel, country music. There's a very interesting exhibit at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where you can take an artist and you can trace their influences backward and forward.
Wow.
And that was one of the parts of my musical journey that I really enjoyed, is looking back and saying, wow, okay, so B.B. King influenced in this way, and country music influenced in this direction. So it broadened my understanding of my own country's music.
Nice. Did you have the opportunity to meet them?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I've been very close to them a number of times, but we haven't met.
So, how many Rolling Stones concerts have you been to in your lifetime?
I've been to 13.
13. That means a lot for me.
It's a lot. There are certainly people who've been to many more than that.
Or in America, or you've been also in Europe after them?
You know, I've seen them certainly in the U.S., and then I've also seen them in Finland and the Netherlands. I think those are the only places I saw them in Europe. And I just missed by a week the opportunity to see them in Italy when they were just... Actually, twice I've missed a chance to see them in Italy, so that's the next goal.
I see. In terms of social activism, what impact has the Rolling Stones music in the American society?
Well, I can think of two ways that they've had an impact in terms of social activism. But I think I would start by saying that the Stones never saw themselves as an activist band. They never really saw themselves as a band that necessarily wanted to change things. They were part of the events of their day, and they did, I think, have some influence. But they really, even now, they see themselves as musicians first and foremost. That said, their music certainly reflected the turmoil of the times. You know, songs like "Street Fighting Man" are about the sort of revolutionary thinking in the UK in the 60s towards social change. And then I think many rock historians would also pinpoint the Rolling Stones' influence on social change based on the terrible and tragic concert that they did at Altamont Speedway in California in 1969, which to some people signals the end of that sort of free-spirited era of the 1960s. And so, in a way, you could pinpoint, two ends of that spectrum, Woodstock and Altamont, as different ends of the same kind of ideal of freedom. In one case, it had a very positive message, and on the other case, it showed that maybe too much freedom can also be dangerous.
Did you think that their music has an optimistic view of life?
I don't know. I would say the Rolling Stones are more realistic than optimistic. Again, they were not. Their goal wasn't necessarily to be a change agent, but to reflect what they were seeing in their society. And certainly, I think the band themselves are very realistic in their approach.
That's fair enough. When did you first come to that realization that you had an ear for the music?
Well, unfortunately, and certainly if you ask my children, I'm a terrible singer. I'm very enthusiastic, but I'm terrible. But I think I've always had a love for music, as a fan maybe more than anything. And I remember in particular my father, who was also a big fan of rock and roll music. Playing me music when we were in the car, taking me to concerts. One of my first concerts.
Do you remember what was your first concert?
Well, I was thinking about that, and it was either the Beach Boys, who played for many years every year at the Washington Monument on the 4th of July. But it may have been the Blues Brothers.
Blues Brothers.
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So I was probably 6 or 7 when I saw my first concert.
Do you listen to songs, the Rolling Stones, differently now than you did, let's say, 20 years ago?
I do. For a couple of reasons. I think the first is that I didn't always understand the lyrics or the background of the songs when I was listening to it as a young girl. And I appreciate it just for the music itself. And then, as I learned more about the band and their influences, I began to appreciate it at a deeper level. And I think one of the things that happens to us all as we get older is that the music that we hear also brings back our own memories. And so when I hear, for instance, Sympathy for the Devil, for instance, I think of all these different things. I think of Altamont. I think of the influence of Brian Jones, whose coat is right here, and bringing in outside, Eastern influences to the music. And then I think about when I saw them in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I was about a meter away from Mick Jagger as he was performing it. So the song has all these layers now, plus the just enjoyment of the song itself, which is itself a commentary on the Rolling Stones' persona as the bad boys of rock and roll.
Right. Who's the most popular group in West Springfield when you were a teenager?
Well, it wasn't the Rolling Stones. I don't think.
I suppose so.
You know, I grew up in the 1980s, and so the groups I remember the most were the 80s pop groups, George Michael and Madonna, and then later, I think, as we got into the 90s, I listened also to a lot of Aerosmith, and they're sort of, that was when they started coming back into popularity. But it was very much the pop era when I was growing up.
I see. Do you know how to play an instrument yourself?
Sadly, no. I studied violin as a child,
Nice.
but I didn't pursue it, and I've always wanted to take some time to learn piano, but
Nice.
not yet.
Do your children take any lessons?
Well, they all love to sing, and my son has said that he would like to learn how to play the clarinet.
Okay.
Maybe not a big rock and roll instrument, but and my daughters have said they want to play the piano.
Nice.
So we'll see.
Yeah. How is music connected to your professional life?
Well, we've talked a lot about how it's affecting me, but really, I think music is often one of the most welcomed forms of diplomacy, because when you are playing music from a certain country, you're learning about that country, and the U.S. government has a long history of using music as a diplomatic resource.
Yeah.
So, one of the most famous groups is the Jazz Ambassadors, who have been made up of obviously different artists over the years, but were one of the first groups to play in the Eastern Bloc and in the USSR right around the time of the revolutions in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And so the US government realized that music has the power to communicate in a very powerful way. So that's something that certainly continues.
Thank you so much. Did you have the opportunity to listen to Romanian rock music?
I haven't, and I would love some recommendations.
Yes, definitely. After the interview, I would be delighted to. So, would you like to send a message to the Romanians right now, in this very Monday?
I would. We've been talking a lot about social change and influences and history, and I think something that we could all keep in mind is that we all have the power to change what's around us. Sometimes when we look at the challenges that exist in both of our countries, we think, oh, that's, the government has to do something about that. The businesses have to do something. And it really always comes down to the people. It always comes down to what you believe in and what change you can make in your immediate surroundings. And so I think if I were going to think of one message sent, it would be that. Think about what's important to you, and think about what, even if they're small steps, what small steps can you do to make the change that you want to see?
So you're saying we should think first at what we should change and not the government or other authorities or...
We can't depend on others to do something. So I think, and this is the message certainly of the music of the 1960s, which is that each person can look for a better future and find a way to make that happen.
The change should start with us, definitely.
That's right.
Abby, thank you so much. Thank you
My
very
great
much.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.